Hello, hello, and welcome to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories here on KFred Radio. I'm Janet Monroe. I'm a birth mother. I say I'm a storyteller, but truthfully, I'm a story listener. But I'm someone who believes that the truth about where we come from matters. Today's story asks a question that many adoptees wrestle with. What happens when the truth about your life is hidden from you, not for a few years, but almost half a century? My guest tonight is Al Isaacs. At 52 years old, Al accidentally discovered something his entire family had known all along. He was adopted. Not only adopted, but adopted through what were known as gray market adoption practices in the late 1960s. Informal arrangements, secrets, missing paperwork, quiet deals made behind closed doors. A time when many believed silence protected children. But did it? By the time Al learned the truth, both of his adoptive parents were suffering from dementia. The people who held the answers could no longer fully explain the decisions that shaped his entire life. Imagine that moment. Everything you believed about yourself suddenly shifting beneath your feet. Your identity, your history, your bloodline, your story. Did he feel betrayed? Did he wonder if his whole life had been built on a lie? Or did he simply feel grief for the decades he lost, not knowing who he truly was? Today, we're going deeper than that in the discovery itself. I want to understand the emotional side of growing up not knowing. Did Al always feel connected to his parents? Were there signs he was different? Did nature and nurture clash in ways he couldn't explain? Did he ever feel like he didn't quite fit? And once the truth came out, who helped him hold it together while his entire identity was being rewritten? Al's search for answers led him through DNA testing, genealogy, research, online detective work, and eventually to a remarkable discovery. His birth mother, Mary Smith, had once been a folk singer in New York who won a nationally televised music competition called Sound of Youth. Out of all the Mary Smiths in the world, music became the thread that led him home. His memoir is called Finding Mary Smith. And today we're going to hear the story behind the story. So welcome, Al. I'm so glad that you came with us today. And I'm really excited to hear this story about how at 52, you found out you were adopted.
Well, thank you for having me on, Janet. That was put beautifully. I don't know if I could do any better. So have a good night, everyone. Take care. That's
a comedian of you coming out, right?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. Where would you like to start?
Tell me how you felt when you found out, or tell me how you found out.
Yeah. So I've heard so many stories about people who take a test and find out quite by accident, and it's a surprise to pretty much everybody. In my case, it was the tail end of COVID. Both of my parents, as you mentioned, were suffering from dementia. In addition, my father had suffered a shoulder injury, and my mother was dealing with her fourth or fifth bout with cancer. So I was maybe a week or two back at work. I was working out of an office designing websites, and I got a phone call from my mom's oncologist. And the oncologist had been trying to get my mom on the phone to ask her about family medical history. I was raised Jewish here, Long Island, New York. I was an only child. And when it comes to cancer, Ashkenazi Jews and cancer, it's a long history, right? So the oncologist had been trying to get my mom on the phone, and my mom kept hanging up on her. Part of her dementia presented as paranoia and anger, and she just kept hanging up on this poor doctor. So I told the doctor, I said, call my parents' house and ask to speak with the nurse that I had hired to live with them. I had a 24/7 nurse taking care of them. I said, the nurse can act as an intermediary and you can get your information. So she hung up with me, and maybe 10 minutes later, I got a call back from the same oncologist. Tried calling your mom several times, and again, she keeps intercepting the call, hanging up on me. I can't speak with her. And I realized that, oncologists, doctors, time is money. I said, let me see if I can help you out. I was like, you're looking for family medical history. I'll be happy to share with you whatever I know. And the oncologist said to me, no. I don't need your family medical history. I need your mom and dad, since, you're adopted. And that was new information for me. But to be honest, I did not take it seriously. In fact, I laughed because, number one, the amazing HIPAA laws that were just violated. But number two, I assumed it was mom's dementia. She had been telling different doctors a lot of different stories in relation to surgery she may have had or didn't have, and symptoms that she would tell a nurse about that she was having. And then when the nurse would follow up with her, she'd say, no, that was my husband. I don't have those symptoms. So this was just another in a long list. So I came home. I told my wife what had happened. We had a good laugh about it. And I sent a message off to an elderly aunt of mine. And more or less, the message was, look how bad the dementia has gotten. This is what she told a doctor. In no way, shape, or form did I suspect this was in fact true. So I sent this off to my aunt, and there was radio silence. And then maybe a day and a half later, I get a message back from my aunt that began with, I always wanted to tell you. And that was a shock. I couldn't speak. I literally had to print out a picture of the message and bring it downstairs and hand it to my wife. I couldn't talk. So yeah, that hit me like a ton of bricks. As far as how emotionally I dealt with it, I was dealing with a lot in that moment. My dad, as a matter of fact, was literally, we were in the midst of putting him into hospice. He passed away 3 weeks after I found out. My mom, as I said, I'd been taking her back and forth for, radiation treatments. She was dealing with that. So between those things and then this, and then life, dealing with COVID, I was having a really, really hard time processing any of it. I'm trying to prioritize what to deal with. For most people, if you're just living a normal, everyday 9 to 5 life, this is like it. This is everything. For me, this was just one more ball in the air that I was juggling, and I kind of had to put my own feelings aside for a moment to deal primarily with my parents' health. So yeah, it was a lot.
Did you feel that your entire life was a lie up until that point?
That's kind of complex. I'm not going to say a lie. I'm going to say, boy, I don't know what to say. There were different parts of my life where I didn't belong, and I chalked it up to different things. For instance, I was raised Jewish in a town where it was me and one other girl in school, and that was it. I was, our family, we had a Christmas tree. We called it a Hanukkah bush, but we had a Christmas tree. So, my whole life, my parents made an effort to explain away things that didn't quite fit. I think because I was an only child, I didn't have someone with me to point out, that's weird. That doesn't sound right. That's kind of off. It was just, there's a line in the movie JFK, where they say, "How do you know your daddy's your daddy? Because your mama told you so." And that was kind of my whole existence, where they made an effort to tell me, "Oh, your eye color, you get that from your grandfather. Oh, your height, yeah, that was your uncle. Oh, this your the comedy career that you have, yeah, that's because so and so like to tell jokes." All dead relatives, nobody I could follow up with, but they were always reinforcing this idea that every trait that I had came from someone within the family. And obviously, it wasn't until after I found all this out and I looked back and went, "Wow, that was something." But at the time, it was like, "Oh, okay." And any differences, because like you said, I became a professional comedian. I've been a drummer for the majority of my life. I think I started playing when I was 7 or 8 years old. My parents were not musical. My parents, their sense of humor was debatable. Um, but I always assumed that sort of thing was generational. So I never took stock in, boy, I'm completely different. You know, I I looked enough like them. And again, it was, before it was white and gray, my beard and hair were kind of, tan and reddish. And my dad, when he was young, had reddish hair. So it was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's where that's from. I was taller than them, but not significantly so. There was nothing that was a red flag from the gate, and everyone went, "Ah, see, we knew it." And it turns out, my parents, because one of the questions I always got, when the book came out was, didn't you ever notice that your mom never had any pictures of her pregnant with you? And I just went, I'm a boy, I'm a guy. I never, you know, I, I'm insensitive that way. I never looked for them. Um, but also that they're like, wouldn't your neighbors notice that your mom one day is not pregnant and the next day there's a baby? And we moved when I was an infant. We moved from Brooklyn to Long Island, so that took care of that part of it. And even though the rest of my family, outside of myself, knew, um, no one in the neighborhood, no one in the surrounding area had any idea.
So when you were going to school, were there any other adopted children at school?
Yes, this is kind of what blows my mind. The girl I dated in high school was adopted. One of my best friends in Hebrew school was adopted,
Were
and
they
it was
treated any differently to the rest of the kids?
no, no. I
Okay.
don't think anyone thought, and you would think if they hid it to protect me, you would think that they would look around and go, "Oh, I guess it's okay. I guess no one's going to pick on him or treat him any differently. I guess we could tell him." It's not like they had to make some kind of public statement or a notice in the newspaper. They could have sat me down and told me. But my parents, when it came to emotional stuff and that sort of thing, they were not very good in dealing with me on that level. Whether it was grieving, whether it was anything complete. We've never actually. My parents never had the talk with me. The
Okay.
fact that I have a son is a minor miracle. I don't know how that happened, but I got lucky. So anything that was complicated for them, they just, all right, it'll work itself out. We don't need to tell them.
You mentioned that you were part of the gray matter adoption,
The gray market. Yeah.
gray market. So how would you
Yeah.
explain that?
Okay. So to explain how I found that out, and this kind of complicates my parents' story a little bit. Um, they weren't going to tell me. 52 years, they never mentioned it to me. Um, but after my dad passed away, and by the way, I never told him that I found out. He passed away 3 weeks after I found out. There was no point in me. He was hiding it. Let him, you know, no drama needed. But soon after that, my mom's dementia got to a point that we had to, find a assisted living facility for her. It got really, really bad. But as I was cleaning out her closets and getting some clothes packed for her, I found my adoption papers, which apparently they had squirreled away in a bank safety deposit box. And then at the beginning of COVID, they got it out and they shoved it in the back of a closet. Why they kept them, if you weren't going to tell me, no idea. Why didn't you burn them? Why didn't you shred them? I have no idea. But at the top of these adoption papers, there was the name of the attorney who handled the adoption. So I Googled him to see if maybe the practice was still around and to see if maybe they had some pay. I'm completely new to all this. I have no idea what legal rights what I could possibly have or not have. There was barely any information on these papers because it was what appeared to be a closed adoption, so there were no names or anything. But there was this, lawyer's name. So I thought I would contact the firm. And when I Googled the man's name, all these articles about lawsuits and the fact that he was a baby broker all of a sudden popped up on the screen, and I was introduced to the idea of gray market adoption. So to explain gray market adoption, black market adoption would barely qualify as adoption. It would be, you have $200, I have myself a baby, let's meet in a parking lot and we'll swap. Gray market, as this gentleman did, and I was one of his first babies apparently, it appears on the up and up until you notice that he is the one attorney for both parties. He represented my parents and he represented my birth mom. So there was no oversight. He fabricated all of the information on here from my birth mom's age to, there was a paragraph about my birth father passing away before I was born. There was all kinds of stuff, and all of it was untrue, which again complicated things and made it even more frustrating for me that I didn't have my parents to help me through this, to explain stuff, to talk to me about it. And to preemptively answer another question, while I didn't confront my dad about it, I did ask my mom. Right after my aunt confirmed it for me, I went to my mom and I said, am I adopted? And she, who told you that? I said, well, first your doctor, and then your cousin, my aunt. And she said, yes, you are adopted. Now, where is that nurse? And she just pivoted and quickly began complaining about 5 other things. So that was the end of that conversation. And then a week later, when I brought it up again, she denied it and said it was all a lie. So there was no getting any further, info from her. So yeah, so to get back to your question from 2 years ago, that's gray market adoption.
All right. So when you found out you're married, you have a wife and a son, and were they supportive of you?
They were amazing. They were amazingly supportive of me. From the word go, they were there emotionally. They were there giving their time. When things became too much for me and I'd get frustrated and I'd have to step away from this, they would pick up the ball and they'd be very sensitive to, he's not ready for something I have to ask. I'll wait. And just all through the process, I could not have done it without my wife and son. And I mean that both emotionally as well as literally. They found clues and information for me, right from the get-go. That was, one of the first clues that I had gotten, because obviously after finding out about Mickelman and that stuff, I did Ancestry, I did 23andMe. If there was a can, bottle, cup laying around, I was spitting in it and mailing it off somewhere. I had to do all the different services. And I initially found, I don't need to tell you, The results I got back, I was hoping for, naive me, I was hoping to get that envelope, open it up, and go, "This is your mom, this is your dad," and happily ever after. Not so much. It was fifth and sixth cousins as far as the eye could see. And there was one on Ancestry that seemed like it was a closer. It came up as cousin question mark. And my wife looked at it and said, "You know what? Based on the DNA percentage and her age, I think this might be an aunt." And long story short, I tried contacting this person, and initially, their daughter, who I was communicating with, a blood cousin, initially said, "Oh, this is great. My mom, I'm sure, is going to want to speak to you. This is going to be wonderful." And then a few days later, "Sorry, mom doesn't want to connect. Best of luck." And that was like one of the first big times I was going, "Okay, this isn't happening. I'm going to walk away." And my wife said, "Okay." And then she took that information and went to her sister-in-law, who's very savvy on computers. And they found this woman's maiden name. And then from that, they found an obituary. And my sister-in-law, she first showed it to my brother-in-law, who fell out of his chair when he saw this obituary. And they said, "Okay, let's show it to my wife. Let's show it to Teresa." And Teresa sat down and read it and then called me over, and she said, "I know you're in a bad place, and I know you're not looking right now, but I think you need to see this." I said, "Well, what do you have?" And she said, "We think it's your birth dad's obituary." Now, at that time, I'm still thinking, based on the adoption papers, I'm like, "Oh, it's his obituary from 1969? And she said, "No, it's from 1998. So in the back of my head, I'm still thinking, this is probably not right. We're grabbing at straws, but let's take a look. And I'm reading this obituary, and I go, "Well, that kind of sounds like me. That trait, that personality thing. Oh, he's a musician. Okay, that sounds, whatever." And then I got to the bottom of the page, and there was a picture of him. And it was a picture of my son. You might as well have taken my son's high school yearbook picture, thrown it in Photoshop, and made it black and white, because that was the picture I was looking at. And I said, "I guess this is my birth dad." So again, without my wife quietly doing this and picking up the space and the slack when I couldn't, we would not have had that, and we would not be off to the races.
That's amazing that you could find that through just checking, and someone that's savvy with computers and knows how to look and how to search. How did you find that your mom's name was Mary Smith?
Wasn't that nice of her to have such an exotic, unique name like that?
When I got the letter from the adoption agency about my son, I have to tell you, it says my son's name was Dwayne Tabinski. And my first thought was, thank God it's not John Smith. At least I had a chance of finding him. So when you told me your mom's name was Mary Smith, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you went through the same thing that I did, only
in reverse. When I was shopping the book around, and I told them the name was Finding Mary Smith, they're like, "Oh, what a great name for an anonymous person." And I'm going, "No, that's actually her name." So one of the miracle things, in addition to that photo, in my birth dad's obituary, one of the amazing things was, in the last paragraph, it mentioned that he had a daughter. So while it kind of hit me, this whole thing that I'm reading the obituary of the man who, who's the reason I'm here, and that was very emotional. And it was maybe a month after my dad passed. I'm like, wow, I lost two dads pretty quickly. It mentioned that I had this sister, and I was so excited and so happy. As an only child, I always wanted to be a brother. So, just like when I was reaching out to the aunt, I sent a letter. I wasn't going to play with Facebook Messenger or anything else. I said, I'm going to physically write a letter. This way, people aren't going to think it's a scam. They're not going to, hopefully. And I wrote a letter to this woman, 10 years younger than me, living in Chicago. Her name is Molly. And about a week later, Molly got back to me. And I wrote this very cryptic, hey, Ancestry says we might be related. And she wrote back to me. She's like, related? I'm your sister, you dummy. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like my sister. And it turns out she had been looking for me for 20 years. And she said to me, she said, I thought you knew, just like everyone else, I thought you knew you were adopted and just didn't want to be found. So Molly and I share a birth dad, Paul, but Molly's mom is not my mom. Molly's mom, Roz, is an amazing, amazing lady who told Molly about me after Paul had passed away. And I don't know how many people would do that. I don't know how many people would sit their daughter down and say, your dad has another child out there. You have a brother out there. And, my husband had another child with a different woman, and I'm going to tell you about him. And she did that. And then was amazing enough to get on the phone with me and say, I knew your birth mom, and I'll tell you as much as I know and try to help however I can. And she was the one who told me that my birth mom's name was Mary Smith. And it's a funny thing and a great thing that she did, because shortly after she told me, I finally got my pre-adoption birth certificate from New York State. And they only started doing that a few years prior. But I got my adoption papers, and on it was very little other information, but birth mom, Mary Smith. Now, had I gotten that without this confirmation from Roz, I would have said, well, that's a nice fake name. A name you'd use to check into a motel. That's great. Rip. Throw it away. But it's like, no, it's confirmation that, this woman is in fact my mom. So using that name and a high school yearbook picture from a school that closed 25 years ago, that's what we were starting with.
And where did you go from there?
Oh, man. We kind of carpet bombed everything. It was all hands on deck. My wife is a very visual person. We both met as editors. We used to edit law books. So she's very visual in picking up clues and stuff. So she busied herself on like Ancestry.com looking through yearbooks. And she was trying to find, maybe Mary has siblings, maybe his brother, any kind of clues. I was doing kind of the same thing. I was going on like classmates.com. I was trying to see if there was any social information, through social media. And I got the help of another girl from my high school who was adopted, who kind of saw some of my posts on Facebook, when I was posting about what I was going through. She got in touch with me and said, I did this to find my birth mom. Maybe I can help you out. And she turned me on to a few different Facebook groups. And through that, I got a group of search angels online who, genealogy experts, DNA experts, some former detectives who know their way around and are, have software and tools and are taking what, little information DNA wise that I had and trying to crack the case. Because my Ancestry.com, when it came to my birth dad's side, was like fully formed and gorgeous. And then it was no branches on this side. No one on my birth mom's side had done any of these DNA sites. So I had nothing going for me over there. So it was a lot of shots in the dark. It was trying to find through her high school. She went to a high school in Michigan growing up. trying to find out, any classmates that are out there and stuff. So it was just kind of like, okay, I've never done this before, so I'm making it up as I go. But I had experts who knew what they were doing, and they were doing the more conventional stuff. And the big clue for me, as we were finding out more and more about Mary Smith, because Roz had said Mary was an amazing singer. She's like, she was incredible, and I think she did, like she thought that there was a time that she worked with Manhattan Transfer, the band, and so she was the real deal. It wasn't like she was just going to a couple of mic nights and she used to sing in the shower. She was like a singer, which even hearing that, my life started to kind of make sense. When you ask me about living a lie and whatnot, it wasn't necessarily I was living a lie. I was just living a life that, to an outsider is going, wow, how do you do that? Why did you, nature versus nurture, right? So to jump ahead a little bit, it was my wife who was pointing to my niece. My niece, Caitlin, is an incredible performer here in New York. And every time she's in a play, every time she's singing somewhere, every time, there are newspaper articles. There are, things in the paper about her appearance. So she said, if Mary was that good, I bet there's newspaper articles about her back then. It's the 60s. It's not the Stone Age.
Is
So
Caitlin Molly's daughter?
no. Caitlin is my sister-in-law, my Victoria, my wife's sister's
Okay.
daughter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's someone who has been in my life for a very, very long time. And so I kind of went back to my search angels, and looking back at it, I feel like kind of a dope, telling them how to, there's that word again, telling them how to do their business. Look, I know you're trained professionals and went to school with this, but hear me out, because I'm a professional comedian. I said, I can you check? Because we had little threads and we had little things. Can you see about this musician angle? Can you look, because they're going back like generations, and they're looking into great grandparents and trying to sort it out backwards. I was like, can you just, and I hate that word just. The word just is an annoyance to me, because it sounds like I'm undervaluing something that you do, so that you won't charge me for it. Can you just look for stuff about Mary Smith, the singer? And my logic was, if I'm wrong, and I probably am, at least you're eliminating this, and I can get off this and go find the real thing. So I sent that off, and maybe a day later, one of the search angels sends me back an article from a Michigan newspaper that talked about a local singing competition called Sound of Youth. And it mentions that the winner of, because there was like a few different categories. There was male singer, female singer, and group. And the winner of the female category was an 18-year-old girl named Mary Ellen Smith. And they said, we think this is her. We think you were right. So now I had Sound of Youth as a search term. I'm not just going by Mary Smith and, it's Mary Smith, Sound of Youth. And all of a sudden, can of worms opened wide. It was like, all of a sudden there's articles and there's reviews, and there's her picture that matches the picture that we had from her yearbook. And we're going, this is Mary. We found Mary. And Mary in that article was talking about how she won the city portion of Sound of Youth. Well, we found out she won the city portion, she won the state portion, she won the regional portion, and then she went to New York for the finals hosted by Duke Ellington, and she won that too. So it was like American Idol before there was American Idol, and Mary Smith won the whole thing. And suddenly my life made sense. I went, okay, this is why I am who I am. Yeah, it was amazing. And that led to finding more and more articles and finding more and more interviews. And I was even though she was 19 at the time, I'm learning about my mom. I mean, she won this in 1968. She gave birth to me in December of 1969. This is the person who gave me life. It was amazing.
And how did you actually find her physical self?
Yeah. So, all this is going on, and I'm we're going through the Cliff Notes version here. We're skipping over a lot of stuff, but because for every one setback, I talk about in the book, there were probably 10 that I was dealing with, but I was at the time, I was so happy just finding Molly, just finding my sister. It was, my soul was like, okay, even if I don't find anyone else, this is amazing. This is great. My life has been enriched so much. And Molly gave birth to a daughter a couple months after I found her. So I had a brand new niece in my life too. It was amazing. Um, so I was good, but I was also obsessed. I was also, okay, more articles, more interviews, more. We're going to find Mary. We're going to find Mary. Because now, even in finding out she's a successful musician, the entertainer in me, in the back of my head's going, there's no record label that's going to let her keep that name. She's going to change it. We don't know what that next iteration is going to be, but we're going, they're not going to put out Mary Smith. And then we're thinking, she's a 19-year-old girl. She's probably going to go get married. So even if she didn't change it with this, she's not going to stay Mary Smith for very long. She's a beautiful young, come on. So, but we're like, okay, every day we're tugging at a different thread. So, someone kind of explained it to me that at that time, in collecting all this stuff, I was collecting interviews and reviews where other people would be collecting memories, right? And I just wanted to learn as much as I could about my mom. And my son, I know I talked about my wife finding a lot of stuff. My son came running up to me one day in my office, and he had his iPad with him. He goes, "Dad, you got to check this out." He found Mary's single on YouTube, and he's playing it for me, and it was so cool. And my wife leans over and whispers in my ear. She goes, "This is the first time you're hearing your mom's voice." And I was like, so it was a daily ritual. It was a daily ritual of what new keywords can we type in to find more articles? What new keywords can we type in to find more pictures of Mary? Mary Smith Coffee House Circuit, Mary Smith Sound of Youth, Mary Smith Folk Singer, Mary Smith. One day, I typed in Mary Smith guitar, and Google Cache popped up this picture of a beautiful Martin acoustic guitar, and right next to it was a picture of Mary standing in front of the Bitter End Club in New York City in probably 1971, 1972. And it was like, oh, I hadn't seen these before. This is beautiful. This is very cool. But it's also weird because while the picture of Mary was from the 70s, this looked like a brand new picture of this guitar. So I did a little more digging on it. I become an internet guy. And I found the website that this picture came from, except this picture was no longer on the website. Google Cache had kept it, but it's not on the website. So I went to the Wayback Machine on the internet, as one does. And I found that the guitar had been on the website probably a year prior. For whatever reason, Google was still clinging to this thing. But so I reached out to the owner of the website. And again, my intention, just like my intention reaching out to my aunt was to tell her about the dementia, my intention was always one thing, and then it would lead to something else. My intention reaching out to the store was, hey, you got this one picture of this girl. Do you have more pictures? Maybe you have a backstory. Maybe you can tell me what happened to her. Because like her musical career and that information ends around 1975. I don't know what happened after that. So I reached out to get more stuff. And after I hit send was when I noticed that the website I was reaching out to was not a .com. It was a .uk. It was in England, which I thought, that's odd. got an answer back a little while later from this very nice gentleman named Anthony, who owned this guitar shop and the website, and said, "Oh, you want to know more about Mary? Sure, I know Mary." And I had to double check. I'm like, "Am I reading this correctly? Does that say I know or I knew? I used to know? No, I know Mary." So I reached out to him again, trying not to sound like a complete psycho, and it was like begging. It's like, if you know Mary, please let her know I'm looking for her. Please let her know I want to get in touch. And we started talking back. He actually called me, and we were going back and forth. And I was trying to tell him the story without overwhelming him with every moment of details. And he said, do you think she knows you're looking for her? I said, probably not. It's been 52, 53 years. And he said, okay, this is kind of heavy. I can't promise you anything, but I'll reach out to her. And he did. And about a week later, I got an email from Mary. And I know, she said the same thing that Molly did, which was, I thought you knew, but never wanted to meet me. I thought you knew you were adopted and just had no interest in me. And it turns out she had been looking for me on and off over the years, but always looking for me as Albert Isaacs, my full given name. I was named after my mom's late father. But in comedy and everything else, I've always gone by Al Isaacs. So if you're searching for Albert Isaacs, nothing's going to come up. So I was so terrified, and I don't need to tell you, it's so different when someone who's 18 years old or 20 years old reaches out and says, I'm your son, or the approach is like, why did you abandon me, or whatever. I think it's very different when a 50-year-old man with a family and a life, shows up. And that's how I tried to present. I tried to present with gratitude and empathy, because I don't know what her situation is. I don't know if she has 3 other kids. I don't know if she has a husband who never knew that I was out there. I'm dropping this bomb in the middle of this woman's life, and I'm terrified that she's not going to want to meet me or connect with me. And it was amazing. She was so open and loving, and I was the only child she ever had, and she did tell her husband about me, and it was magical. It was everything I could have hoped for it to be.
You're bringing tears to my eyes, because I'm remembering when I first met my son, and he was 46 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And the emotions, and what I went through. When I first got his name, I Googled him, and it just came up in blue that somebody in Nashville had just sold a house to a Dwayne Tabinski. And when I went onto clicked on that, it took me to his Facebook page, which was born in Winnipeg, lived in Kansas, and was now in Nashville. And so I knew it had to be him, because there can't be too many Dwayne Tabinskis from Winnipeg.
Right.
And then I just sent him an email, but I didn't get it. I sent him a message on Messenger, but I didn't get a response.
Okay.
And then it was a couple of months later when I knew I was going to be headed to Florida and thought I could stop in Nashville on the way home and meet him, that I sent him another message, and I actually got the response. And
let me ask you, what was it like for you? Because with Mary, there was no social media. And with Mary, I knew her as a 19-year-old girl. What was it like for you to look at his Facebook page and see years of his life and the people around him and family and friends?
I didn't look at it that closely. What happened when I went to it on first, there was a link to his business, and there was a video on his business of him promoting a sound machine.
Yeah.
And he was in that video, and I knew it was my son by looking at him. Yeah. But then I sent it to my daughter and said, hey, take a look at this, because this is probably your brother. My daughter already knew.
Wow.
And she said, Mom, that's definitely our brother. He looks more like you than I do.
Yeah.
And then, and the first time I spoke to him, I found out I had 3 grandchildren and 5 great grandchildren. And that's when kind of the world exploded. All the memories come
Yeah.
back. You hide all these memories. You put them behind this concrete block wall,
Yeah.
and you keep them hidden for so long, and then all of a sudden everything just opens up and you remember everything that you went through back then. And I'm sure Mary went through the same thing when she spoke to you. All the memories came
Yeah.
rushing back of what
Yeah.
happened, what she went through, what she was told, how we have to forget that we had this child, and just
Yeah.
put it by the wayside and just get on with life.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just makes so much difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. So
And at this age too, it's a package deal. Mary's not just getting me. She's
right.
got a daughter-in-law and a grandson, and all of a sudden it's it you got all this to integrate with now. And I'm sure you feel the same way, just so blessed that between my sister and with Mary, it's like all of a sudden all these people are now part of my life. Just man, count my blessings.
We did end up stopping in Nashville on our way home from Florida that time, and it was my daughter, my son-in-law, and 2 grandkids, and my other son. And we made arrangements to go for breakfast. So that way, if we didn't get along, we could leave.
Right.
We had the excuse we had to drive home.
Right.
We went
Traffic.
to breakfast at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we weren't sure what we were supposed to do. And my
Yeah.
youngest grandson, you better make up your mind because I rang the doorbell. And so we didn't have a choice at that point. And we said, well, we'll just hug because we're huggers. And that's what we
Yeah.
did. And we were there from 10 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
So
That's
we had a
amazing.
full day. The
Yeah.
real estate agent that posted that he'd sold a house to Dwayne came over that evening. They were having a party for the hockey game. Came
Mhm.
over that evening, and we were telling him that he was the reason that we were able to get in touch.
Yeah.
We were telling his wife that, and she says, that's too much for a Monday. Her response to that. So,
But isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? So for you, it's a real estate agent. For me, it's a guitar shop owner. These
yeah,
people who just happen to be at the right place at the right
right
time
time.
to give you that one clue that you were missing. It's amazing.
It is. It's amazing the way the universe works and puts everything in place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's. I go back and I think when Dwayne and I spoke, his mom and I worked at the same insurance company at the same time. She went into the hospitality industry. I was in hospitality. Then she managed a furniture store for 30 years, and I owned and operated one for over 40. We
Hmm.
had so many parallels in our life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's so fun. I talked to my wife about it. It didn't even occur to me until after I had written the book. So my mom's name is Mary Smith. So here on Long Island, in addition to performing as a comedian, I taught improv comedy.
okay.
For a number of years, I taught it at Hofstra University and a few other places. But the first place I started teaching it at for about 5 years was a comedy club called The Brokerage. Great club. I performed there. The owner and I just clicked, and he brought me in. The owner's name is Gary Smith. It's one letter off. That's like the universe teasing me. It's like, really? Swap the G for an M and you got her. I
Yeah.
mean, come on. That's crazy. So weird. But
So
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, but you know what? We talk about the universe and the way things work out. And um, just that, had I found out, because people ask me, are you mad? Are you angry? Don't you wish you knew years ago? And there's part of me that's like, I would have liked to have known. It would have been helpful going in for surgery, not giving someone else's family medical history. That would have helped. Just little things like that. But when I sit down and I'm honest about it, had I found out 20 years ago, the internet's not there, the DNA stuff is not there, New York laws with finding stuff out is not there, I never would have found anybody. It wouldn't have worked. Had I found out a couple of years after I did, after my mom passed away, let's say, she miraculously got better and lived in the house and everything was great. And I didn't find the adoption papers and I never found out. Had I found out 2 years later, my aunt, who gave me the first initial clues, and a few of the other people passed away. So it was like literally there was this window of opportunity for me for this to work, and that's exactly when it happened. So that I found out how and when I was supposed to.
Exactly. The letter I wrote, the email or message I sent to my son was that if it's the wrong timing for you, that's okay. If there's a time and place for everything, it has to work for both of us.
Yeah.
And it was the right time.
Yep.
And
Yep.
just everything fell into place. I live in a place called Barrie, Ontario. And that summer, he was coming to Barrie with a group at the Boots and Hearts Festival to do the sound and the audio for them.
Yeah.
And, like, how could that possibly happen? Like,
what are the chances?
3 months after meeting.
Yeah. What are the chances?
Yeah.
Meant to be.
Just meant to be. So for those of you out there that are hoping to find or still looking, just keep going, right?
Yeah.
Just keep going. So how would you have felt if you found out when you were younger? No, let me put this a different way. Yeah. You found out at the age of 52.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to people who the best age to find out you're adopted is?
I've spoken to a lot of people, in doing this. That's one thing I want to tell people, who just did a DNA test to find if you were related to Napoleon and suddenly discover, your life isn't what you thought it was. The best age to find out is the age when you find out. Do I wish I had known growing up? Maybe. I don't know. Knowing how my parents are, how my parents were. See, I don't know if they kept it from me to protect me or to protect themselves. If it was a matter of pride or embarrassment, I don't know. I wish I could have sat down and told them when they were here and the dementia wasn't around. I wish I could have told them that it's okay. One of the first things I told Mary, our very first Zoom call, I said to her, just to kind of diffuse the situation, I don't know you, but I love you. You gave me life and they gave me a life. And they did. For all the complications that I may have had with them, with our relationship, I know they did their best. I know they tried to love me. And I know it wasn't a thing of anger or malice that they kept it from me. That's what they thought was best. And maybe it was a generational thing, and some people that I've talked to who were a similar age, they were like, they didn't want to tell people they couldn't conceive, whether it made him less of a man or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know what our relationship would have been. I think I would have understood them a little bit better, though, had I known. Because one of the things in looking back at our relationship, I know, for instance, like every time I did something that was cool, in comedy or in music, I've done some pretty cool stuff. I'm not, not to brag. I've done some cool stuff, but a lot of it I did to impress them. And I didn't know that no matter what booking I got or what award I won or what thing, it didn't matter. Every time I did that, I was reminding them that I wasn't made of the same stuff. It was, they wanted me to be this thing and they did their best to mold me into that thing, but that was never going to happen. And I didn't know that. I didn't get the rule book. I didn't know what game we were playing, right? So it was very frustrating for me that I would be so happy driving home from a show that I just did. And there were this many people and it went so well and, standing ovation. I couldn't wait to tell them, and they weren't proud of it, and they never were going to be, because it was reminding them this wasn't who they, they tried to make something else, and 20 years later he wasn't turning into that thing, and he's doing the other thing that we heard the other people did, and why isn't this working right? And it was a frustration thing. So maybe if I had known, we could have sat down and had an honest conversation about this sort of thing, but I didn't know. I didn't know. um, so for the people who find something out, you know I cling to it happens for a reason, when it happens. But for the people who may be keeping the secret, all I can say is there's no such thing as closed adoptions anymore. These secrets don't stay secret. People are going to find out. And, whether it's an uncomfortable conversation you have to have now, better to have it now than find out like I did when it's too late to have the conversation. You know, that's you know, I'll have questions forever, and I can only assume what the answers are because they're not here to tell me.
You said you first spoke to Mary over Zoom. Have you met her personally?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait. So the first time Mary emailed me, she was on vacation with her husband in Tenerife, and the fact that I was so grateful to her husband Robert for kind of sharing her with me, because here they are supposed to be enjoying this time away together, and she's emailing me. um, and yeah, we got on the Zoom call, and I don't know what else to compare it to, but like a first date when you're trying to present your best self, and it was unfair because I knew so much about her from reading, and she knew nothing of me. And I'm trying to again present myself as not a psychopath. Um, and it was so great, and I think I don't know if she still knew enough about me. Like she had, even though she wasn't on social media, she had friends who were, and they all of a sudden started contacting me and asking questions. They wanted to make sure, they wanted to protect their Mary. So maybe 3 months after our first Zoom call, I made arrangements to go to England for like a weekend. Who does that? But I did it. I flew out on a Thursday and I came back on a Sunday. I said, just like you going to breakfast. This was me going to breakfast,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to dip my toe in. And if she hates me, okay, I get to see a little bit of England. Okay. And we'll just call it a day. And it was amazing. It was so great. It was so meant to be. It was so easy. We got each other so well, and we spent a couple of days just she and it was really cool. The night before I flew to England, she got me on the phone just to talk to me a little bit about what we were going to do and make sure I arranged things with trains and hotels and everything was copacetic. But she says, my husband's really excited to meet you, and he's going to make a cottage pie. He's either a cottage or a shepherd's pie. So there's two different things. One's with beef, one's with lamb.
Okay.
And he was making the one with beef, which I think is cottage. But anyway,
with the beef,
she wanted to make sure that I would like it. So she says, here are the ingredients. Do you like beef? Do you like mashed potatoes? Do you like peas? And she said, do you like onions? And I said, well, I like the taste of onions, but depending how they're cooked, I'm like the texture sometimes just kind of, I don't know. And there was like a moment of silence, and all of a sudden she says, wow, you are my son. And just hearing her say that out loud, but even at such a weird moment, but hearing those words come from her, it's like, wow. And that was the coolest thing. There were so many moments in talking to her and hearing her stories and stuff that she would say something that I didn't know I needed to hear. And it was so beautiful and amazing. And I spent the weekend there, and then we made arrangements for a few months later, the following year over the summer, we flew her to New York. and she stayed at my house for a week. So I got a chance to show her my life, and I show her the places I performed at, the things that I did, and where I met my wife, and that sort of thing. And then we took a train into the city, and she showed us the clubs she used to play at, and her old apartment building, and all this. It's like, come on, this is a Hallmark movie. This isn't real life. It was so perfect. It was so great for everything that happened that could have gone sideways but didn't. This was like the cherry on top. It was amazing.
I know what you mean. We always thought our meeting was a Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
And the 6 great years that we had together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Life is good, and life happens the way it's supposed to happen.
Right.
Right. Things fall into place. And when you're talking about the things that are traits from Mary, it just goes to show that nature is always more predominant.
Oh my gosh, 1,000,000%. Just talking to her, my whole life makes sense. You know, talent-wise, professional-wise stuff. I'll tell you a quick story too. After the Zoom call, Mary and I started speaking on the phone fairly regularly. And one of our first calls, we just started comparing careers. We just started comparing places that we played and our favorite shows and what for us made a good set, because, comedy and music, not too far off, your opening joke versus your opening song and how you connect with an audience and that sort of thing. And we started talking about what our favorite show that we did was. And, for her, it was this college that she played in Texas where she thought 100 people would show up and it was 1,000 people. And I was talking about this other comedy festival that I did, and it was just so cool. And my wife heard the conversation, and after it was done, she came over and she's like, I've heard you try to talk about this with your parents. And the one thing that they always asked was the one thing that you two never talked about. She said, at no point in talking about any of your shows or any of your favorite concerts did you ever mention how much you were paid. That was, my dad was a Wall Street guy, and that's how they measured the success of something. They want, after I did a show, as excited as I was to tell them about a new joke that I wrote or a moment I had with the audience or just something that happened that was artistically satisfying, they wanted a number. And without speaking about it, it's like, no, like Mary got it. We're made from the same stuff, and we knew it was, important to each other. And it was amazing. It was so cool.
Well, Al, thank you so much for being here and for telling your story. I'm sure it's going to affect a lot of people because there are many more people out there that don't find out they're adopted until later in life. And they need to just keep looking, keep trying and finding out the answers because the answers are there. So today's story reminds us that secrets do not disappear simply because they are hidden. Sometimes they wait quietly for decades. And when they finally surface, they could shake the very foundation of a person's identity. Al discovered at 52 years old that the story he believed about himself was incomplete. Yet instead of turning away from the truth, he chose to chase it through DNA tests, old records, finding memories, and finally through music itself. There's something powerful about that because adoption is not just paperwork, it's identity. It's a belonging, it's history. And every person deserves to know where their story began. Al's memoir, Finding Mary Smith, is more than a search for a birth mother. It's a search for self. And perhaps today leaves us with an important question. Does knowing the truth earlier spare someone pain? Or does hiding it create a different kind of pain altogether? I'm Janet Monroe, and this is Roots and Branches Adoption Stories on KFred Radio. If you have a story to tell, please reach out to Roots and Branches, www.rootsandbranchesadoptionstories.com, or call 615-870-6433. Until next time, keep searching for the roots that shaped you and the branches still waiting to grow.